Hello, it's Tracy Kiernan from stepbysteppainting.net, and this acrylic painting tutorial will show you how to paint a fall lantern with acrylics on an 11 by 14 inch canvas. So we're going to go ahead and get started right away. The background is a blended background, and I used 5 colors in this background. I have titanium white on my palette, Cad Yellow Medium Hue, Phthalo Green, Phthalo Blue, and Dioxazine Purple. If you want to simplify this palette, you don't have to use the purple. The purple is only on the corners of this painting, so you don't technically have to use it, but it does provide a nice, pretty color in the sky. And the background is a blended background with circles starting in the center and working our way out. I'm using a 3/4 inch flat brush to do this technique. And I'm going to start by dipping my brush in the water and tapping it dry. So the first thing we're going to do is paint the center circle. And that is a very, 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 very light yellow. And you can see me mixing that color on the palette. It's about 10 parts white to 1 part yellow. You want to just make sure you're not adding a lot of yellow in there. Just grabbing that yellow right there on the corner. See how fast it turns yellow? You want it super light. In fact, I'm going to actually bring this over here on the side and add some more white in here. So it needs to be a very, very light yellow. And we're going to start in the center and paint a circle. So the reason why the center is bright yellow is because of our candle. So that's going to be the part of the painting where our candle is glowing super bright. We're just going to paint a circle, and my circle is going to be about 5 inches in diameter. I'm just gently painting that. Very nice thin layer. I'm not putting a lot of paint on the canvas. In fact, it's way easier to blend colors when you don't have a ton of paint on your canvas. And so what I'm going to do next is I'm going to actually wipe my brush off and not rinse it. Grab some white, and I'm just going to make the center part of my circle a little bit brighter by adding just the white and blending it outwards in a circular direction. So that is the brightest part of our sky where our candle will be making that pretty glow. This next part is a bit of a challenge because we have to go from yellow to blue. So we're actually going to make a light blue-green color. It's going to look like a turquoise. I'm going to grab this Phthalo Green and this Phthalo Blue. So I just grabbed those 2 colors right on the corner of my brush. I'm going to grab a little bit of white and see how I'm blending off the side with that white. I really want this to be a light turquoise, and I'm going to keep blending off to the side to lighten that up, because if I added that white to that original darker color, it would be much harder to tint it white. So I just make a new spot on my palette, and I'm going to blend by starting on the outside of that circle and painting this really light turquoise color, and I'm going to gently introduce that into my yellow. Grab a little bit more white on there. Titanium white helps to blend when I add a little bit more of that on my brush. So you want to paint on the outside of the circle, and you want to gently introduce it to that yellow very carefully. And so I'm going to kind of paint over that yellow, and it's going to turn a little bit green as I work that transition zone. So the transition zone is where the yellow and the blue meet together. I'm actually going to wipe off my brush here, and a little bit too much paint on my brush for this blending right here. So here's the transition zone where that yellow and the blue meet. And because I wiped my brush off, I'm not introducing new colors in there. I'm just working those colors that are already there. You see that? So it's going to look a little bit green right there where that yellow and that blue meet. We don't want that blue to go all the way to the center, because remember, the center needs to be super bright because of our candle. So we have a transition from yellow to our light turquoise, and then I can go back in here with a little bit more white and kind of bring that out a little bit if I want that glow to be a little bit bigger. So I'm just taking that, and it's going to look kind of greenish here. I'm just taking that and kind of blending it outwards a little bit more. And then we want to continue on in our sky, working our way outwards, and it's only going to get darker from here. So I'm going to use this first sort of shade of turquoise that I made. I'm just going to make more of it and grab that on my brush. And I'm going to continue to paint outwards. Adding a little water on your brush is helpful with flowing that color and also with blending. But you don't want to add too much water on your brush. So that turquoise color is going to be our next one. And so we're going to do the same thing. We're going to start on the outside of that circle and gently introduce it to that previous color. You can wipe off the paint on your brush if you want to work that transition zone. Just be really careful not to get too much blue in the center. And we're just going to keep working our way outwards, gradually allowing that blue to get darker. And to get that blue to be darker, you're just adding more phthalo blue to your brush and less white. And you're just going to keep working your way outwards in a circular direction. So more phthalo blue on my brush. Add a little bit of the titanium white in there. We're not at solid phthalo blue yet. We just want to get this gradually darker. So we're working our way outwards. And when you work the transition zone, you just want to brush over it a little bit more. Sometimes I like to grab a bit of titanium white as I kind of inch into that previous color, that transition zone, and then just keep doing circular strokes outwards, grabbing a little bit of titanium white to get that to blend with that previous ring of color. And also if you need to add a bit of water to your brush to help it to flow, because sometimes our paint is drying way too fast for all this blending, so a little bit of water kind of helps. And so I'm going to do our next ring of darker colors, so grabbing more phthalo blue on my brush. At this point it's mostly phthalo blue, not so much titanium white, so blending it outwards. I'm going to leave a space open where the corners are because that's going to blend to Dioxazine Purple. And I did mention earlier that purple is optional, but it does give a pretty color right there on the corners, and that purple helps to make some of our other fall colors pop a little bit. And so just going all the way to the edge of the canvas, leaving the corners open. Grabbing bits of titanium white helps blending, and also having some streaks of titanium white even in your darker area really gives the sky some depth. And you don't have to blend everything perfectly or all the way. If it's streaky looking, that's okay. So right here I'm just grabbing some little bits of titanium white. See how it just kind of leaves it unblended and streaky. It really helps to create that swirly effect in the sky when you grab bits of titanium white in there. And again, some phthalo blue right closer to the edges, grabbing bits of titanium white. I accidentally grabbed a little bit of yellow in there, so to salvage that, I'm just going to wipe my brush off and just take that and kind of blend that into the rest of the sky. A little bit of white and blue, and we'll just have a little yellow streak in that area, and that's okay. So more phthalo blue closer to the edges. Grabbing some titanium white helps to kind of blend everything. So next I'm going to introduce our Dioxazine Purple. This is a really dark color, and actually I'm going to rinse my brush off all the way. Grab my purple. You just want to be really careful with this purple because it is a really dark color. So when you blend that into the rest of the sky, you don't want that purple to go too far because we don't want to lose our brighter colors that are closer to the middle. So we want to take that and then we just want to introduce it to that blue very carefully. In fact, if you want to grab a little bit of white on your brush, that helps to introduce that color and blend it a little bit better. So I grabbed a teeny bit of white and the phthalo blue, and I'm just doing that in that transition area over here. Again, it doesn't have to be perfectly blended. It can be streaky and unblended, and that adds to the effect. A little bit of titanium white. And then I'm just going to do the same thing with these corners. So getting the Dioxazine Purple and blending that into the rest of the sky. So working that transition zone. Your paint, unfortunately, is drying really fast. Mine is too. That's just how acrylic paints work. But to get that to blend, I just grab a little bit of the phthalo blue and the white on my brush and let that blend with that purple that's wet, and then just kind of gradually introduce that into the rest of the sky. Just try not to get your dark colors to go into the middle, and the middle is definitely too dry to work. So if you wanted to work that, that really is not going to work because it's too dry. So just try not to overthink it. And this is just the background. There's a lot that's going to be going on with the foreground. But what I am going to do is just take my finger and get that white right in the center and just kind of smear it out so that center is extremely bright for our candle. I have our next step is going to be splattering the stars. So I have a toothbrush, and I do this with a lot of my paintings with stars. And I think I just paint a lot of nighttime paintings. It's something that I do a lot of. But rinsing my 3/4 brush off here. But I'll be using a toothbrush to splatter. So I like to take my finger and apply the water and apply the white paint. This just gives me the right proportions for some reason. You may have a different technique, but you want to test it out first before going on the canvas because you don't want to mess it up. It should not be too thick and it should not be too thin. So it shouldn't be dripping down or running. Then if that's the case, it's too thin. And it shouldn't be splatting chunks of paint. Then in that case, it's too thick. But when you get the right consistency, you get fine little specks of stars. It's going to show up on the darker area. It's not really going to show up on the lighter area, but you can do it all over. It'll show up a little bit on that light blue. So you don't really have to concentrate in the center, but you can especially get some really pretty stars on the darker area. I'm just going to do it pretty much all over. Later on, when we're done with everything in the painting, we can go in and add individual stars where we want to see individual stars at. But we are going to be drawing our lantern next. So this cannot be done unless your painting is dry. So this painting is dry right now, and I have a piece of chalk. The chalk will show up nicely against the dark background. I'm going to start at the top and do a horizontal line. So I'm drawing the holder of the lantern. It's going to have to go to the center and curl down because the lantern is centered, because that's where our candle is going to be glowing. Our candle is inside the lantern. So I did a horizontal line to the center with a little curve. And then this piece right here is going to curve down maybe about 5 inches down from that top piece. It's like a triangular shape. So chalk erases easily with water. If you mess up, you can get a wet paintbrush or I find a baby wipe or a wet wipe or a wet paper towel works better for erasing chalk than a wet paintbrush. But inside of this triangle piece, we have 3 different spirals, large, medium, and small. So you can draw those that are embedded into that shape. And then we're going to move right along and start drawing our lantern. We have the holder part of our lantern, so it's like an upside down U hanging from our hook. And then we have our top part. So this is going to go down at an angle towards the left. So see how that's angled that way? And then this piece right here is going to angle the opposite way. That is the top part of our lantern. And then the right, or actually the left face of our lantern, I have to move my chalk because it's not drawing. It's a brand new piece of chalk, so sometimes it's hard to get the line to start going here. But the left face of it, I'm going to do 2 angled lines. And these lines are not exactly straight. They actually curve a little bit. This is going to be the top face part of the roof of our lantern. It's going to go to a point on the left and then it's going to angle back up. So it's a very kind of a skewed perspective in this painting. And so this one over here on the right, again, it's going to kind of curve and not be exactly a straight line. And then that part is going to kind of curve and angle this way, and that's going to go to a point. So it's a very whimsical sort of shape. It's almost like we're drawing the top roof of a house. And then this part, so that's where our glass of our lantern is. These are going to angle both downwards. So it's going to angle to the left. And this is going to go as far down as you want your lantern to be. So if you want it to go down a little bit further, you can. There's 3 lines in our lantern that divide where our glass is. So there's this middle line. I'm actually going to angle it more towards the right and have this bottom piece go down. Make this bottom piece a little bit darker. These 2 lines are parallel. This one's not. The line on the far right is not parallel. It angles the opposite direction. I'm actually going to raise the roof of the drawing here with some clean water, and I'm just using my finger and I'm going to erase this top part, and I'm just going to raise, get those lines to go up a little bit higher because my candle right here is the center part where I did the bright lines, and that's where that flame of the candle should be, and I want that showing in the painting. So I'm just taking these lines and drawing them a little bit higher up on the roof. So there's my top line. These lines may have to angle differently. This one right here, going to angle down to make sure that touches the top of the roof and the bottom of our lantern. And then this can always be adjusted as we start painting it in. So maybe the angles might change a little bit as we're painting. The drawing is just meant to be a guideline for our composition of the painting. I'm just going to kind of darken these lines so you can see. This base right here, there's lines that are kind of offset upwards. So this part is going to be painted in solid at the bottom if you look at the final picture. So that part is a little bit thicker. Just kind of erasing the unneeded chalk lines. And then if you want to draw the candle in the center, you can. You don't necessarily have to draw the candle yet because I'll be drawing that a little bit later in this tutorial with a pencil, so it's a little bit darker and you can see. I will draw the floor of our lantern, so I'm just going to kind of take this line and kind of angle it both the opposite directions so we can kind of see the floor. And then our candle, so that tops part of the oval should match up with the bright glow because that's where our flame's going to be. And I can just kind of sketch it out a little bit, but that'll be drawn a little bit later. So what we are going to do next is start painting our lantern in. We're going to work at the top where the holder is, and we're going to work pretty much from the top to the bottom. So the holder is pretty simple. It is done with Mars Black and a little bit of titanium white. I have a number 4 round brush and I loaded it into the Mars Black in a little bit of water. I'm just going to use my T-square real quick to make sure that is horizontal and perpendicular to the side of the canvas. I'm just going to use that as a base, but then I'm just going to free paint that without the ruler. And I'm just painting what I drew with the chalk with the paint. So I'm just going over my chalk drawing. The chalk will erase as you paint because the paint is wet and it's erasing the chalk as you go along. And this is just my black. I can make it as thick as I want. If you want it to look thinner, you can make it look thinner. And I just did the spiral, and I'm going to do the rest of that shape. I'll be introducing a little bit of white later to give the holder some highlight. But for now, I'm just making sure that I'm going over my drawing, getting it the thickness that I want. So adding a little bit of water into your black really helps to let it flow. Mars black tends to be a chunky color that doesn't flow as easy unless you add a teeny bit of water to it, so you can get it to be kind of an ink consistency. It shouldn't be too watery to where if you were painting on an easel, it should not be dripping. So if it's dripping, you added too much water to it. So don't let it drip. And then our spirals here, I didn't even follow my drawing. I just kind of did those on my own. So that happens a lot of time when I do the drawing. I just kind of paint it differently. When this dries, I will definitely erase my chalk so it's not there or visible. So there's my holder. And for highlight, just adding, I didn't even rinse my brush off. I just grabbed a little bit of white right there on the tip of the brush because I want that to blend naturally with our black that's not dry. So on the bottom, just kind of painting the bottom part of our piece with the white, letting that blend gently with the black, especially with the spirals. So just on the bottom part of the spirals really gets that part to pop and give it some highlight. Maybe the glow of the candle is hitting that area. Then we're going to work our way down and do the little holder, the little thing that's holding the lantern to the hook. And that's our upside down U we drew, but we want to draw it to make it look like it's on the hook, so you can see where I picked up my brush right there where the hook is. The rest is solid black. Then we're going to go down and I'm going to outline my entire roof here. So all the things I did with chalk, I'm just taking my brush and I am outlining that first with just black. So going over my chalk drawing, the sides of our lantern go to a point. Those two lines are parallel, and this line is parallel to that top line. So our roof of our lantern, again, it's got to go to a point. So when we outline it, that's going to make it a lot easier to paint in. But I'm not going to use my round brush to paint that in because that would take a long time to do and be a little bit tedious. But I'm going to grab my number 12 bright brush. So this is a flat brush, and I want to double load it in some white and black, because the white's going to give some color variation in here. If I painted this all solid black, it would not look 3D-ish at all. The left side of our roof is darker than the right side, so I'm just going to take my brush and load it in mostly black. Use the full width of the brush to paint strokes that are parallel to that top and bottom line of the roof, so kind of horizontal, and I'm just going to paint that in solid. So there's just a tad bit of white in there. Later on, I can add just a bit of highlight, but I want to just make sure that the left side of the roof is going to be darker than the right side so it can look 3D-ish or 3D. And then I can use the tip of my brush to outline the shape if I need to re-outline that or redefine it. And so the right side of the roof is going to have a bit more white. So I grabbed kind of a chunk of white on my brush. There's still black, so I'm just kind of gently introducing this right here, kind of dragging my brush. It's going at a different angle. So look at the line that we drew. These strokes have to be parallel to that line. They're not going in the same angle that we did on the left side. They're going at a different angle. And I'm going to do this part. So this flat brush, I can use the tip of the brush to get into those smaller areas and outline, but the middle part, the bigger areas, I can use the full width and drag my brush. So again, we just want to make sure this part is a tad bit lighter, so a little bit more white. It's going to look kind of a medium gray color, and it's going to be lighter towards kind of the left side, but then I made the right side where that point is a little bit darker. I'm just taking that white and kind of outlining this part right here, a little bit of highlight right there. You don't have to do that. And then outlining the top part, just doing a few bits of white in here, and actually right here on the far left of that point, I added a little bit of white and kind of dragged it in there and just kind of dragging some more white pieces in there. It doesn't have to be a perfect blend. It just kind of has to look 3D, using the white to create some contrast in our roof. Then I'm just going to continue this color down using the tip of the brush, and I'm going to do our 3 lines of our, I almost called it a lighthouse, of our lantern. And So these are the lines that kind of divide our glass pieces. So there's our center line, and then our third one. I'm going to kind of make it make sense. It doesn't have to go exactly on the chalk drawing. And the bottom piece as well. So I'm just using the tip of the brush. This one kind of curves, so it kind of goes up and curves. It's not exactly at a diagonal line. And then I can use the tip of my brush to redefine and re-outline the top of the roof. So I have our basic lines in, and those lines are going to end up getting thicker. And then this base piece, I'm going to outline that in, and those are painted in solid. So I can use the full width of my brush to paint those two areas. So those are just painted in solid black. And if you want, you can add a teeny bit of highlight to it by grabbing a little bit of white, just kind of dragging it from the left to the right. So that makes it look like it's got some different color variations in there. And then I can add a teeny bit of white to my brush and start making these lines a little bit thicker. That white's going to make those lines be not so solid black, gives it a little bit of highlight in those lines as well. So I'm pressing kind of a little bit harder just to make those lines a bit thicker. If you don't want to use the flat brush to make those lines thicker, you can go back to your round brush if you want. And then we have our floor inside of our lantern. And I know this is not really the right perspective in this, but we're just going to call it abstract and whimsical at this point. But I'm just painting the floor in here with a gray color and just kind of doing some expressive strokes to fill that in. Doesn't have to be completely solid, just fill it in. And when we do the candle, there'll be a little bit shadowing in there later, but I just want to get that floor filled in because we can't do the candle unless that floor is there. It'll be a little bit harder to do the candle that way. Then I'm just going to grab my round brush here and some black, and I want to make our lines a little bit thicker. I'm going to lose a little bit of this highlight I already did, but that's okay. So maybe a little bit of white can still drag in there, but I'm making these thicker. So all three of those lines, going back over them to make them thicker. Outline that bottom edge of that roof right there. And I want this one, so this one's going to kind of curve a little bit at the top. A little bit of white right there on that corner piece. Just to make that stand out from the line piece, I added a little bit of white so it looks like it just doesn't, like they're two separate pieces. And then I'm just making sure that this part goes to a nice point. I'm going to take this line and make it thicker with my black, going back over that line. Going back over our middle line again. I want it to be a little bit thicker at the top and just get thinner towards the bottom. And I'm doing that first line that's over here on the far left. Again, a little bit thicker at the top, gets a little bit thinner towards the bottom. Slightly outline our base piece. Make sure that that's more defined. I'm going to go ahead and do this third line on the right, just making it a little bit thicker. Make sure my line is nice and smooth. Then I'm just going to grab a little pop of white right there on my brush and go back over this corner here. Add a little bit of white to that corner to give it some contrast. A little bit of white to that far point. A little bit of white on our little holder piece. And just a few lines of white here and there. And so we're done with the roof and the lines and the base of our lantern. We're going to move on to the candle. This is a fun part. I'm going to mix a light gray on my palette really quick. You need a lot of white and just a little bit of black. So make kind of a light gray so that our candle, it looks white, but it's actually a light gray. And so grabbing a little bit more white in there. I'd say maybe about 5 parts white to 1 part black. My brush had a little bit too much black on there. And before we start painting your candle in, I'm actually going to draw it with a pencil so I have the placement. So this is a good starting point, is to figure out where that center part of that glow is and to draw the flame. So I'll move my hand here in a second. So I did the little flame shape and that vertical line for the wick. And under the vertical line and the flame shape is our oval shape. So that's the top part of our candle, and it's a cylinder. So I'm going to go vertical down and it's going to curve on the bottom. And the candle is pretty much right there up against that center line. So we don't really see the far left line of our candle. And then when you have it drawn in, you can grab your number 4 round brush and that light gray that you created, and you can outline the shape of your candle. Grabbed a little bit more white. The gray was a little bit more dark than I wanted it to be. So I outlined that top oval piece with the gray, but then I'm going in and filling it in with some more titanium white, kind of blending with that gray. So that's the top part of our candle. And then I'm just going to outline our bottom piece. So there's our bottom curved piece and our vertical piece. And then I'm not going to paint everything in with the round brush. I'll be using that flat brush here in a second, using my T-square to make sure the candle is going vertical and doing that curved piece on the bottom. I'm going to grab my 12 flat brush here, wipe it off and rinse, grabbing white. Oh, grabbed a little bit of black in there, but that's okay. So actually this is what I wanted to do. So we're doing streaks of color in here with white and a teeny bit of black. Did some curved strokes on the bottom, but I want a little pops of gray to show up in there because I don't want it to be solid white. I want it to give it a little bit of a rustic look by adding that teeny bit of black in there. It's creating those streaks, and I don't want to blend those streaks all the way. So streaks of white with a teeny bit of gray. Doing that curved bottom piece. Next, I'm going to go in and extend the base part of the lantern. So I'm mixing that same gray as before. Turned out to be a little bit lighter, but that's okay. I'm just extending this out a little bit because our candle ended up a little bit larger than anticipated. So I'm just kind of loosely extending this, and then I'll fix the bottom part of the candle so it doesn't look as wobbly. So I'm just making that curve go up a little bit higher, mixing that gray. And there's actually going to be a shadow underneath this candle, so it's going to be a little bit darker here in just a second. Filling that base out. Then I'm going to grab a little bit more black on my brush. I didn't have to rinse the brush, I just grabbed the black. And then I'm just going to outline that bottom part of the candle. Put my other flat brush down, grabbing the black, and just kind of loosely add a shadowy area right under the candle. Kind of curved strokes that loosely go to the edge of the base. And then using the medium gray color, I outlined the top piece, but I'm going to draw these little wax pieces that are kind of floating down. So I'm just kind of loosely drawing some vertical columns of wax, few curved strokes on the bottom of the candle, Then I grabbed a little bit of white and loosely add some white to that wax, give it some 3D texture to it. This candle does not have to be realistic. Next, I'm going to do the wick of the candle. So just going to rinse my brush off and grab just the black. This is still the number 4 round brush. And I'm just going to loosely add a bit of water to that black so it's kind of thinned out a bit. And I'm going to use the tip of the brush just to paint a vertical line. So there's the wick. And then I'm going to do the flame next. So I loaded the Cad Red Medium Hue color on the palette, so red and yellow if you need to freshen up your yellow. And I'm just going to erase the rest of my pencil drawing there, get that out of the way. And I'm going to load my brush in red and a little bit of yellow. This is going to make it a dark orange, so mix red and yellow together to make orange. Load the orange on the tip of your brush, and we're going to paint the outer part of the flame. The center part of the flame should be bright, so I'm not touching that center part just yet. I'm going to wipe the brush off and grab the yellow. So I'm going to add a little bit of yellow on the outer part, a little bit on the inner part, but we don't want any red in the middle part. So you can paint the middle part yellow. And then I'm going to kind of dry brush some of these yellow strokes on the outer part of the orange part of the flame. So mixing a lighter yellow here and doing some light strokes on the outer part. And then our inner part is super bright, so I grabbed a little bit of white on my brush and just painted that inner part. The inner part should be nice and bright and like a super, super light yellow, mostly white. Just adding a bit more white right there in the middle just to brighten that up. Or maybe some strokes kind of radiating around the flame. So there's our flame. I'm going to touch up that orange piece. Kind of lost the orange in there. Kind of a point to our flame there. Next, I'm going to rinse and grab my black again on my round brush, and I'm going to do some loose outlining in a few places. I'm going to outline the base, so the back part of the base lines right here. This part just very loosely. And I'm going to do a little bit of outlining on the candle. So on the top circle or the top oval part of the candle and on the bottom right part of the candle. So I didn't outline all the candle, just a few spots to get it to pop a little bit. And then I'm going to erase all my chalk lines. So you don't want to do this if any part of the painting is still wet, especially the part where you're erasing. But if it's dry enough, you can get a baby wipe or a damp paper towel and gently wipe off the chalk. I find this is more effective than using a wet paintbrush because sometimes too much chalk residue is left over if you use a wet paintbrush. But this gets the chalk off nicely. I'm just wiping all those white lines off to clear everything out. And then I'll be demonstrating how to do the tree branches. So these are fun. This is burnt umber. Get my brushes all rinsed off here. I'll be using the round brush for the tree branch. So I'm going to get my burnt umber to be a little bit darker. So it's the brown, adding a tiny bit of black into it to darken the color. A little bit of water on the brush really helps to get these branches to flow. So I'm going to start out with kind of a thick line that's going to go thin very quickly. So thick to thin. When you do thick, you press harder on the brush. When you do thin, you kind of release the pressure and use more of the tip of the brush. So thick, release the pressure, it goes thin to a point. If you like using different brushes for branches, you can most certainly use the brush that you feel comfortable with. I tend to gravitate towards the round brush, but sometimes I'll use an angle brush or a flat brush for my branches. It just kind of depends on, sometimes it just depends on how I feel. So there's my first branch, and then there's going to be another branch in this painting. I'm going to make this branch a little bit, extend it down a little bit more. So this other branch is coming out on the right side of the canvas. Maybe it's part of that other branch, not really sure. It could be its own branch or a different tree, but this one's just kind of extending down on the right. It's going to prepare us for doing all the really pretty fall foliage in this painting. All the orange and yellows are going to really pop against the blue background. So there's our second branch, and you can get more detailed with these branches if you want. You can add more stems to them. You can extend them out even further, however you feel. You don't even have to add the fall color in there. You can have this painting be bare branches if that's kind of what you want. So I'm just extending some of these branches out, adding a few more, kind of stemming out. Next, I'll be doing the fall leaves, starting with the larger leaves that are falling down. And so we want to use Cad Red and Cad Yellow. I'm going to freshen up my yellow in here. And you'll also need some titanium white if you need to freshen your white. So red, yellow, and white. And the number 4 round brush. So we're going to make a color. It doesn't really matter the proportions, just kind of grab a little bit of white, a little bit of red, and we have a light red color. If you wanted it to be orange, you can add a little bit of yellow to it, but I'm just going to create a very loose, abstract looking leaf that's falling or flying in the sky. So I did the center line, and then I'm just going to kind of form the outer lines or the outer shape of the leaves. So we have this style of leaf that kind of has the curved prongs. You can be very loose and abstract about this, or if you want to get realistic, you can paint them more realistic and keep rendering them. So I'm going to do several of these style leaves that have kind of the curved prongs to them, but they can all be different colors. So this one, I actually grabbed yellow on my brush. This one's going to be more of a yellowish color to it, but I started with that middle line, and then I'm just using my brush to form the outer parts of the leaves that are kind of curved on the ends, and the middle part at the end kind of goes to a point. Maybe add a few strokes of yellow into this one. And then I'll make another color on my palette, like a lighter color. Just adding some more yellow to that. I like how that golden yellow looks against the leaf. Maybe it's from the candle giving it a little bit of highlight, or the leaf is kind of a two-tone color. But over here on the top left, you don't have to do this if you are a little intimidated by this, but this leaf has landed on the roof of the lantern. So I'm just going to paint a simple rounded / pointed style leaf that's just kind of resting on the lantern. So I used yellow, white, and a little bit of red for that one. So I'm forming the shape of it. And I'll go back later to do these stems and the little vines after the base of the leaf kind of dries. And then just kind of figure out where else you want your leaves to fall. Maybe there's one over here on the right, and it might be overlapping some of the branches, but that's okay. So that one's going to be more of a yellow one, maybe smaller than the other ones. It gives some interesting perspective in the painting if some leaves are bigger and some are smaller. Grab a little bit of red and just kind of stroke in some reds in there. Very, very loose and abstract symbol leaves. I'm not going into much detail at all with these leaves. Next, I'm going to do the stems of the leaves. So I have the brown, a little bit of black. I rinsed all the yellow and orange off my brush, by the way. So brown, black, get it to be a little bit loose, just like we did with the branches. So with these leaves, I do a line, and then do like a dot right at the tip of the leaf. And then I can loosely do a line in the middle and do the little veins on the leaf. And so I'll do that same thing for each of the other leaves. So line with a little dot on the end of the stem and the center line for the veins. Next, I'm going to do the fall foliage, and basically this is really simple. We're just taking our brush and dotting the colors on the end of all of the branches. So I'm using red and yellow, a little bit of white. If you want, you can incorporate a little bit of brown in there, and we're just stippling. So stippling means to take your brush and dot your little paint strokes all over the place. So fill it up as much as you can. This step takes quite a bit of time, but it's always a zen moment when you get to do little dots of leaves in your branches, because you can just kind of not think about it. Just grab the colors and add your little dots all over the place. I like to do a nice variety of color in there. Some areas that maybe are a little bit darker, so maybe some areas are just more red, maybe some areas pop and there's going to be a cluster of really bright yellow leaves, cluster of white that kind of makes some areas of our leaves pop out. So just variety kind of helps with this technique. None of the leaves are overlapping the lantern, so these branches are behind our lantern in this painting. I mean, if you wanted to, you can have your branches go in front, but I didn't want to hide any of the lantern that I worked so hard to paint, so these are definitely going behind. You can have your clusters of leaves go up higher in the sky if you want. So with that said, I'm going to go silent here for a bit while I finish this step. And then really quick, I'm going to do a few touch-ups on my candle. I'm just going to grab that red and the tip of my brush and outline the outer part just to get that darker red color right there in the middle of the flame. And I'm going to do some yellow highlighting on the lantern. So really loosely with the yellow and the white. When you grab the white, it makes the yellow stand out a little bit better versus if you just use the yellow. So yellow and white on the tip of the brush. And I'm just adding little pops of yellow to the lantern to make it look like that candle is glowing and kind of highlighting some of the edges. Gives some interesting yellow color to look at. So right there on some of the edges. You don't have to do that step if you think it's a little bit too detailed or you don't like that look. And then, so the last thing that I'm going to do with this, actually the second to the last thing we're going to do are the stars. So I recommend you find a really tiny brush. This is a 10-0 spotter brush, and I'm just taking the white and just kind of dotting it to make little clusters of stars. But then I'm going to switch to a 10-0 liner brush. So this brush has the bristles that are a little bit longer And the longer bristles create these sparkling star effects a lot easier than the spotter brush. The spotter brush doesn't have the longer bristles. These ones have the longer bristles. So this is the liner brush. And so I'm going to make a whole bunch of these twinkling stars because they're really pretty and add to the whimsical mood of this painting. So you just take the tip of the brush. You need a steady hand for this. But because the bristles are long, they're able to create these very, very thin strokes. So I start in the middle and just quickly, the stroke happens really quick, and just release the pressure and your line will go to a point. So you do like a little plus sign. So a little plus, and then you do diagonal lines between the plus, and those little diagonal lines can be longer than the plus. What I think looks really cool is when the sparkly, I'm going to call them sparkly stars, when the sparkling stars are showing through the leaves, so you can paint them in an area that's kind of a clearing of the foliage. It makes it look like there's stars sparkling through the leaves. Very pretty effect. So I'm going to do several of these stars all throughout. So this is what I was talking about. So you're doing this sparkle between the tree. Very pretty effect. So you can do a whole bunch of those different styles of stars in your leaves and throughout the sky. So I'm going to go silent here while I do that. A lot of also doing little dots of clusters of stars. So do as many stars as you would like to do. The last thing I'm going to demonstrate in this painting is how to do the dry brush effect to create glass on our lantern. So I'm using the bright brush, that 1/2 inch flat brush, 12 bright brush. I loaded a little bit of white on the tip of my brush and I wiped it off. You want only a very, very small amount of paint on this brush. Otherwise, you don't want your glass to look solid white. We want it to look see-through and kind of foggy almost. So I'm just dragging this brush with the full width of the brush at the angle that the glass is in. So it really is, looks really nice on the left side of our lantern. It doesn't really show up too much on the right side. We can have it show up right here. I did not want to do that many dry brush strokes over the candle. I didn't want to lose the part. I didn't want to paint over too much of the candle because I really didn't want to lose the prettiness of our candle. But we can have a little bit of it go over the candle. It's just this area is so bright, like it's the dominant color in this area is white anyway. So the white dry brush is not going to show up too much. So you can get away with just not doing any dry brush in that area. But over here on the right where it's a little bit darker, definitely can see a lot of the glass glare right here. It gives a very pretty effect. So just make sure there's not a lot of paint on your brush. You're just dragging it very loosely to create that glass look. And that is it, my friends. Thanks for watching and thanks for painting with me. I hope that you enjoyed learning how to paint this fall lantern with me.